When the Battle Cats was created, the developers did a wonderful job on making the stages and balancing them to challenge the player. It starts off easy and slowly increases in difficulty and complexity as the player is rewarded with resources, such as XP and new units to combat the new threats. The units you unlock as you play introduce new enemy types, as well as new abilities as a solution to the new enemy types. Initially, the Battle Cats had heavy consideration on stages and units, and both were nicely balanced. But as time went on, the developers have introduced some controversial units and mechanics that have influenced the balancing of the game. To take a proper look at how it has changed, we'll take a look at 3 units in this video: Awakened Bahamut, Dasli, and D-Phono, and how these 3, in their own ways, completely remove the difficulty of the Battle Cats. Awakened Bahamut Cat released in version 4.5 as the true form to Bahamut Cat and the reward for beating Into the Future 3. Having to face the alien counterpart of this new, unshackled Bahamut first before unlocking the true form, surely it must have been a good reward for the player's efforts, right? Yeah, it was a pretty alright reward. Bahamut's true form revolutionized the Battle Cats with the strategies that were possible with him, and Bahamut chaining became a common strategy to the hardest stages around its time, seeing Yusin learn to love to deal with the H-Nos quickly, Realm of Carnage to deal with the Arast waves, and Parade of the Dead to deal with the Angel waves. It's also worth noting the cheese potential with Awakened Bahamut due to his sheer DPS output. There are countless stages that fall under that list. The community generally agreed that Awakened Bahamut Cat was one of, if not the best unit in the game, and its power and presence stayed around the top years after it was introduced. His role was one of a kind, and there were very few units that served a similar role to him, much less even match his power. Now, while this true form was an insane change to the Battle Cats as a whole, and drastically made stages much easier, it still took skill to utilize him to his full potential. Timing is crucial with Awakened Bahamut, and if the player does not have good timing with him, it means 4,500 cash down the drain and a Bahamut on cooldown, which could make or break a run. Eventually, he did start losing relevance in stages long after his debut due to the aforementioned drawbacks, along with other units coming out that could match his power with less risk to them. But there would be one mechanic that would bring him back to the top better than ever, but we'll come back to that later. Before we get into explaining Dasli and D-Phono, there are 2 mechanics we need to become familiar with to have a better understanding of these next 2 units. Long Distance Attack was introduced around version 4.7. This ability causes units' attacks to only cover a certain area. Long Distance adds a whole new dynamic to the game, and countless units and enemies inherited the ability since its release. If you want to have a more in-depth explanation and showcases about the Long Distance Attack, I would recommend checking out Lucas's video on it. It's well made and explains how powerful the ability can be. There will be a link below in the description of this video to it. Surge Attack made its first appearance in version 9.2, and it's an ability that has a chance at being created for a fixed duration and position. The only requirement for it to be created is having its creator's attack connect. One of the big things with Surge and other abilities similar to it is that it applies the creator's original damage and crowd control abilities, such as Slow and Curse. Another point is that they linger on the battlefield, which seems unassuming at first, but it enables the usage of base trapping, which will instantly damage and cripple anything that comes out when placed over the base. For the units that have Surge, it is always a strong point to consider with them, as it acts as both a DPS output increase and potentially stronger crowd control. Now that we explained these 2 mechanics, we can finally talk about Dasli, with her actual in-game name being Castley the Bane, was introduced in version 9.5 as a new Uber unit to the Epicfest banner. She was one of the first cat units to receive the Surge ability, with her Uberfest counterpart being the first. So, why do we talk about the Epicfest version instead of the Uberfest version? Shouldn't they, in theory, be trade-offs between each other but relatively equal in power? Previous units introduced in these banners before typically followed the Uberfest version's target all traded, and Epicfest target only traitless. What makes this one different? Well, what makes the Epicfest version stand out as the more powerful unit between the two versions is that she broke that format they had followed before and target every trait, including traitless. To add insult to injury, she also boasts better stats overall and virtually outclasses her Uberfest counterpart. But what about their abilities? The Uberfest version has the knockback ability, which enables her to be an aggressive pusher. Her wide attack range allows her to push the frontline and backliners away to keep your army safe. The drawback with it is that when her ability procs, you miss out on extra damage that she could have dished out, so you should rely on other units for damage to help take out the main threat. Despite that, she still remains a solid unit overall and can be useful in a multitude of stages. Now with the Epicfest version, she inflicts Curse. A quick rundown on Curse for people that might not know. Curse can disable status-inflicting abilities for both cat units and enemies. For example, if Divine Huntress Terran gets inflicted with Curse, she would no longer be able to slow her target traits, plus lose her boosted stats against them. This can be quite annoying to deal with when going up against enemies that inflict Curse if you don't prepare for it, but on the contrary can be quite useful to inflict enemies with. You can disable the main gimmick of an enemy, and by extension the whole stage, if you manage to land Curse on them, so you can start to see why this ability can be very powerful, even more so when it's guaranteed and essentially has full uptime. Even if she is put into a stage where her Curse does not apply, her stats more than make up for it on top of her high Surge level. Comparing the two Castleys again, Castley has a level 2 Surge, while Dasli has a level 3 Surge. Since the two have effectively the same attack time, this means that Dasli has a higher DPS output than Castley. One thing that might be overlooked about this is that since she has a higher Surge level, it effectively makes her have a faster attack rate. The reason why is because the Surge covers the time between attacks with constant damage, with each higher level covering more of the time gap. We can take for example Brainwashed Macho Legs Cat. Their attack frequency is 125 frames, and they have a level 4 Surge attack. Each Surge level lasts for 20 frames, so for Brainwash Legs, their Surge attack lasts for 80 frames. Accounting for the small delay that happens between the main attack and the Surge actually spawning, which is about 15 frames, there's only a 30 frame gap between when the Surge attack ends and the next attack begins. This means there's effectively only 1 second of downtime between attacks for Brainwash Legs, which makes it very difficult for enemies to get any attacks in. Having constant pressure on the front lines is very powerful, even with just the damage that Brainwash Legs offers. Relating this back to Dasli, with her Surge level she gets to cover at least half of her attack cycle with constant damage output, and with her damage per hit being decently high, she can constantly juggle peons and deal with the main threat of this stage with ease, with very little openings for the enemies to push through without taking damage. With the combination of her insane stats paired with her unique ability, she safely and comfortably destroys almost any stages she comes in contact with. Her alone can carry anyone through 80% of the game with minimal issues, as she's very easy to use, being you just send her out and then you win. Her only main weaknesses is her long distance blind spot being susceptible to melee enemies and zombies, and enemies with Surge immunity, which can heavily hinder Dasli's output potential against them, but that can be fixed with the 9 other slots available in your lineup, which leads nicely into the next unit who could help with covering her weaknesses. King of D-Phono, also known as D-Phono, or D-Phono. D-Phono was introduced in version 12.3 to the Epicfest banner, and his role is to serve as a sniper, as well as a small crowd controller. He was also the first unit to receive the mini-surge ability. D-Phono works a bit differently than Dasli, as while he does have a long distance attack, it's broken up into 3 parts as a multi-hit attack, so generally you won't be able to have him deal the full expected amount of damage. This isn't that ideal for a unit whose main purpose is to deal damage, but luckily this 3-part multi-hit does benefit him in regards to his mini-surges and slowing ability. Just like Dasli, D-Phono's slow ability affects every trait and is guaranteed to proc. On its own, it wouldn't be anything of note, but when paired with his guaranteed mini-surge ability, it actually catches enemies into the slow, which becomes very potent against incoming faster enemies. Along with all this, due to his 3-part multi-hit, he can generate up to 3 mini-surges each attack cycle, which can land and control most of, if not the entire battlefield, and slow the pushing down to a halt, which makes it a lot more manageable for your front line to stay steady. Now what about his damage output? For each attack cycle, he deals around 7000 DPS, but it's important to remember that you won't be able to consistently reach his max DPS potential due to his multi-hit. Since it's cut up into 3 parts, if an enemy only gets hit with one of his multi-hit parts, he will average around 2.3 to 2.4k DPS on them, which sounds a lot more underwhelming. Thankfully this is only in a worst case scenario if enemies are on the outskirts of his multi-hit range. If enemies are standing within the region of D-Phono's standing range, they will usually be hit with 2 of his multi-hit parts, which brings his DPS up to a more respectable amount of around 4.5 to 5k DPS. What's great about this is that you get this respectable DPS at 500 standing range, and it hits between the 490 to 750 range, making him a very potent sniper. Why is his standing range important though? It's only 100 more than Dasli, it wouldn't make that big of a difference, right? The thing is, Dasli was already at a good standing range to outrange most common threats and bosses, so D-Phono having 100 more range than her makes him safe from even uncommon threats and bosses that pierce further into your backline. On top of this range putting him safely out of the range of most enemies, his pierce is insane, being able to attack up to 900 range, giving him 400 pierce. There's not many units that have this same insane piercing to their attack, and it gets even wilder when we consider his mini-surge can spawn up to 1100, giving him 725 pierce when accounting for his mini-surge. While the mini-surge isn't good for damage, it's great for his slow ability to control enemies before they even get the chance to cause a problem near the front line. There isn't really much of a hard counter to D-Phono. Tackies could cause issues, but he has decent enough survivability to where you could manage long enough to take them out, either from D-Phono himself or through the work of the other units in your lineup. Not many other enemies can hit up to that range with good DPS, which makes his HP at his range ridiculous. He's always a safe pick for most stages. Pair him up with Dasli, and you could beat most of the battle cats without breaking a sweat. With these 2 units released, it would seem that they would reign supreme over the game, entering into a new era of broken units that every player wishes to get.
Oh my god, what? That's a good one.
There's seemingly nothing that could beat them.
Oh my god.
As time passes though, there will always be something introduced to shake up the meta. Explosions made their debut in version 13.7. They work similarly to surge and wave attacks, needing the creator's main attack to connect to have a chance at being procced, and carrying over the creator's original damage and crowd controlling abilities. There is one key difference with explosions though, and that is they do not have any levels to them. When a unit has this ability, they won't vary in duration or how big its hitbox is, they just have the ability. The other main difference with explosions is that they actually have 3 separate hitboxes to them that spawn. One big explosion that deals 100% of the creator's original damage, 2 medium-sized explosions that deal 70%, and 2 final small explosions that deal 40% of the damage. These explosions linger on the battlefield similarly to surges, which means base trapping can be performed with these units, and they have the consistency similar to waves, always having a fixed position and hitbox that are predictable. Explosions almost essentially act as the best of both worlds of the 2 abilities. Bahamut in the day and age of Dasli and D-Phono reigning supreme over the game had started to fall off in his usage of modern stages. He seemed to start falling into his niche of a rusher unit that was risky to use, but could reap good rewards if utilized properly, but that was starting to become rare in the modern day. It seemed that Bahamut's reign was finally over, and other units in his niche were starting to perform better. He seemed to be in a good spot of balance. And then Ponos announced talents for him. Truly an ingenious move. Bahamut's talents were introduced in version 14.2, and with it he was revitalized and shot right back up to being one of the best units in the game. To say Bahamut's explosion talents are broken and busted would be an understatement. It is a truly game-breaking mechanic. Let's not rush ahead of ourselves though. Let's start with how you get these game-breaking talents. Talents are not inherently unlocked with him when he is true form, nor at level 30. You must first complete a stage to unlock them. This stage is locked behind two conditions, one being having completed Cats of the Cosmos 2. It is more balanced around having fully beaten Cats of the Cosmos 3 though, so realistically you'll only attempt this after having beaten Cats of the Cosmos 3 with all treasures. The second condition is that you must have beaten Valkyrie's talent stage to unlock her talents. It's a similar case with Bahamut, where you unlock her stage after beating Cats of the Cosmos 1, but it is balanced and recommended to play it once you have beaten Cats of the Cosmos 2 with all treasures. Now for the stage itself. It starts off with moves that serve as a cash boost in the beginning for you to max your wallet, and then the main threat of the stage spawns, Bahamut himself. Not an alien counterpart of him, just Bahamut himself, except he has a little Doge icon on his chest instead of a cat icon. How neat! What isn't neat is that he has the explosion ability, and you have to defeat him to win the stage. Thankfully, with his long time between attacks lasting longer than the explosion being on the field, you can use this weakness in him to chip him down. At this stage in progression, you won't really have many options to deal with explosions, as there's very little units in the game that are immune to explosions unless you get lucky, so you'll have to bait and sneak in attacks onto Bahamut with fast units, preferably Fishmen, as your main source of damage. You can keep a pretty consistent rhythm up with cycling your units and chip Bahamut down, but it's not that simple. There's a starred Shibalian that spawns in, at fixed time intervals, to mess with your cycling and rhythm, so you'll need to prepare and deal with the small waves of the starred Shibalians. A more than likely oversimplification of the stage, but eventually you should be able to win over it. Once beaten, you then gain access to easy mode for the rest of the game. Explosion talents. Why is it so good on Bahamut? Well, at level 30, Bahamut deals about 30k DPS in true form. Already a ridiculous amount. With explosion talents, it instantly doubles his damage output, dealing 60k DPS.
Ooh.
To put that into perspective, the only other unit in the game at the same level who could match that is a talented strengthened Balrog, but unlike Balrog, this is dealt as an area attack instead of single target. On top of that, it also gives Bahamut a small bit of pierce. Doesn't sound like much, but when the biggest issue using Bahamut before was peons getting in the way and not being able to deal damage onto the main boss, it eliminates those two problems together. The explosion can clear the peons nearby and deal full damage onto the main boss. Pierce on a rusher unit is something that's not seen very often as a whole, which gives Bahamut back a very valuable niche to rule over again. With how absurd his damage output gets, it inadvertently improves his survivability. How? Because he can just kill and juggle everything before it kills him. I was able to chain Bahamut for such a long time on Zero Field 2-star because his damage output along with other units was enough to constantly juggle them back and keep Bahamut safe between attacks. Without Bahamut, it would have been a much longer and more grueling stage to get through. Another thing is that since he gains explosions, he can perform very easy base traps if you let him hit the base first. He can unleash his damage right onto any enemies and peons that spawn out of the base and severely cripple them, if not outright kill and end the whole stage. You can pretty much speedrun through stages when you let Bahamut hit the base first. The lingering effect of explosions really shines with Bahamut, as it can make it look like enemies get damaged by nothing, and cover Bahamut's time between attacks by a bit. The lingering is best showcased on Portly Mummy against the Winged Piggy of the stage, where Bahamut can just barely fully solo the Winged Piggy that spawns with the help of the Curse Blast Cannon. Bahamut still can suffer a bit with his ease of use not being the best, especially when compared to Dasli and D-Phono, but he more than makes it up in his damage output, where the main difficulty of using Bahamut just becomes setting it up to get him in and attack, which is nowadays made much easier when you pair him up with something like the Thunderbolt Cannon, freezing enemies briefly to open a window of opportunity, along with his other talents to make him easier to use in time. Considering how relatively early you can unlock his talents, you can cause huge sequence breaks and beat stages while being severely underpowered overall due to how much Bahamut makes up for it in raw damage output. For reference, my friend Tavi was able to unlock Bahamut talents on his alt account at 2,856 user rank, while not even having pushed past Musashi in Stories of Legends, and player user 674 was able to unlock them at 2,057 user rank. Because of the consistent design of the stage, it becomes easily obtainable with a bit of knowledge and skill involved. With all this power, it's easy to forget that this can be gotten by quite literally every player, as Bahamut is a given unit from completing Empire Cats 3. Unlike Dasli and D-Phono, You don't have to roll and pray you get them. If you work hard enough, you can achieve his power. I suppose it's fitting that one of the most powerful units in the game is something that everyone can be guaranteed to have. That's about everything I wanted to talk about in this video. I appreciate anyone who watched until the end. This video took multiple months of on and off making, and it's my first time making this type of video. If this is something you would like to see more of, be sure to like and subscribe. It'll tell me that this is what people are looking for and are interested in. Also, make sure to follow me on Twitch. I stream Battle Cats over there as well as other games, but I'm always interested and happy to help people with Battle Cats. Anyways, thank you for watching. See ya.